Our practice has been and always will be to use the absolute, infallible Word of God preserved in the Authorized version of the King James Bible 1611 in the International Language of English.
Psalm 56 verse 8. All right, Psalm 56 verse 8. David talking. Tell all my wanderings. That tell is like a teller in a bank. It means to count. To tell like a teller in a bank, to count. And he said, you tell on my wanderings. Put my tears in my bottle. Are they not written in thy book? Now the things that are written in the book are his wanderings. And of course they are written in the book. If David wrote that, his wanderings are found in 1st, 2nd Samuel. And he says, put tears into your bottle. Now God has three things for the child of God. He has a bag for your transgressions. That's in Job. He has a book for your wanderings, and he has a bottle for your tears. So put the tears in the bottle. Now that bottle is what they call a lacrimatory. And lacrimatory is a little old kind of a vial. It's like a perfume bottle about that big. And what they do in those days, at a funeral, they'd hire professional mourners. And a professional mourner would come in, and sometimes several of them, and they'd cry for the dead person. And they'd take those tears, put those tears in bottles, and those were glass bottles, and they take those glass bottles and bury them in the casket with the corpse. So he says, put my tears in your bottle. So if that thing means anything, it means that God is a tear collector and collects tears. The Bible is filled with things like that. You find a queen crying. That's Esther weeping over people. That's Rachel weeping over children because they're not. Esther's a queen. Rachel's a mother. You find a queen weeping, you find a king weeping. There's David. Absalom, Absalom, my son, Absalom, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. You find a farmer weeping. I didn't say much about that this morning, but that farmer is weeping because he that goeth forth weeping, bearing precious seed, that's the farmer, shall doubt again, return again, see? In that farming and stuff, you don't know what God's going to do with your crops. I've been over there in the Philippines and seen a whole rice crop wiped out with locusts. I've seen a whole rice crop in one Pampangan province wiped out with a volcanic ash. Sometime it is in locusts. One part of the Panay and Iloilo down there, that rice crop got wiped out with a typhoon. Now, you and I have no idea what it's like to have that happen to you, what you plant in the garden, when you're staying alive depends on it. See? And I grow stuff in the garden, but I'm not dependent upon the garden to stay alive. Those folks are dependent upon that stuff to keep them alive. And then the Lord just takes it and wipes it out. You say, why? All those nations are given to idolatry. And the saved people suffer right along with the unsaved ones. But those things there have to do with tears. The farmer's crying, are we going to make this crop or not? Maybe it's going to freeze too quick. Maybe it's going to be too hot. Maybe it's going to be too cold. Maybe it's going to have bugs going to get it. I don't see how many fellow could farm and not believe in God. I don't see how you could possibly do that. You're just dependent upon God all the time, day and night. You find a king crying. You find a preacher crying. Paul said he's with you in weakness and fear and trembling and tears and praying that God would bless what he did. You find a Savior in tears, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. There's a lot of crying going on in that Bible. Life, brethren, is a vale of tears. Now, when I say that, I'm not the least bit pessimistic. I mean, frankly, and I could be wrong, but frankly, I believe I enjoy life as much as anybody 30 years old in this continent. If you get a bang out of life, don't you worry, I get a bang out of life. I mean, I enjoy it, man. I enjoy it all day long, just about 7 days a week. I have a better time than a lot of people in this country, 30 and 35 and 40 years old. So I'm not a pessimist, but I know what's coming. What's coming is hospital beds and graves. That's for you and 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 you too. Hospital beds and graves. Now the Lord come and get us out, we got it made. I hope he does. But if he doesn't, we're all going the same direction. You ever stop thinking about going down a road and watching the traffic? Hundreds of people, thousands of people, millions of people going up and down all day long. You know where they're all going? They're all going the same way. They're all going to the same destination. You say, where's that, Ruckman? A hole in the ground. Dust thou art, to dust thou shalt return. You're going to a hole in the ground. That's where you're going. You may stop at a different city on the way or a different country, but you're all going to the same place. It's a veil of tears, and crying starts when you're young, and it goes on all your life. I figured out one time, if you shed 50 tears a year, then multiply that by the population, something like 3 billion now, and then went back to Adam and Eve and tried to figure out the population. My mathematics probably not much good. I probably underestimated it. But 50 a day, all those people in 6,000 years would come to 120 million gallons of tears. If you just shed 50 a year, drops, 50 a year, it come to 120 million gallons of tears. You could float a battleship in that. And it starts early. It starts when the baby's born. Baby comes in, the baby's born. Don't you know what happened to that baby's born? That doctor pulls him out there and hits him on the tail end. The kid lets out a yell. And I don't blame him well, for what he's coming into. The little baby sits there. You ever see a little baby and lie in the bed at night? Lying there going, you know, after he's been crying. And sometimes you see a tear just drying there on his cheek, lying there in the bed. Starts then. And you get this little boy here and this little boy here. You don't quit crying. Kid catches his finger in the door. Slam a car door on his finger. How many ever had that experience? Let me see your hands. Yeah, I told them these are dangerous weapons, man. Or a closet door. What's he doing? He's crying. Mama, daddy, you know, that kind of thing. Come to daddy. Oh, daddy, I hurt my finger, dad, finger. Dad takes one look at it, no blood on it. He said, run on, kid. He said, you know, you're in trouble. He goes to his mother and says, I blood my finger, and she makes a big fuss over it and kiss it and all that mess, and disgusted, you know. And then, and about a minute later, she comes back to the doorway of the boy and says, why didn't you help him, John? He says, help him? You don't need no help. It ain't bleeding. I could do nothing for him. And the little boy says, you could have said, oh. Mother would think of that, you know. Oh, you know, my poor baby, my precious. Just make you puke to think about it. But that's the difference between men and women, see? I've got news for you. No matter what those jackasses in those universities say, men and women are not the same. If they're the same upstairs, because they ain't men and they ain't women, they're freaks. They're freaks. And you don't get through it when you're a little old boy. You get a little boy and go off to school, and then you get in the fight at school. Then you come home. I used to come home when I came home 10, 11 years old, a bunch of dogs bit me. 5 dogs out in the field. I went over to play with them, you know, and they bit me. And then you don't get over it there. And you get, you know, about 14 or 15, puppy love, you know. And you fall in love with some teenager, you know, or have this dream, platonic relationship, and they start playing the country western music, you know, and you get feeling sorry for yourself, and she breaks the engagement and gives you back your frog, you know. My generation, we live, boy. I mean, well, we have a love affair like that, you know. We're 11, 12 years old. We give the girl, instead of give her a ring, we give her a frog. Then you get to be about 17 or 18, gets more serious, and then you get hurt, and then you make it fool around with liquor, you know, try to get away from it. Then you be 18, 19, or 20, and they get you in the Army or join the Marines. Then you go there, and you don't quit crying when you get in the Marines. I got pictures home. One of the pictures I've got is up there in Korea in that Marine division there, and one Marine sitting there, and he got this other kid's head in his hand, patting him on the head and trying to comfort him. It's daddy. It's got to be daddy to him. Daddy's about 25. The boy's about 19. Just all come apart in combat, just bawling like a baby. The older guy trying to help him out, you know, comfort him like a mother would, you know, that kind of thing. You don't ever quit. You get old, get up around 60 and 70 and 80, it doesn't quit. Sometime you'll see a man 50, 60, 70, even 80. I've seen about 80 years old sitting there telling about his family and saying, well, Brother Ruckman, he said, I had a couple of sons, and he said, one of them grew up, but he said, the Lord took the other one when he was about 10 years old. And the old man didn't cry when he said that, because that'd been years and years and years ago. But I noticed he just kind of twitched. He just kind of flinched when he said it. I bet he shed some tears. This life was a veil of tears. You know why comedians are some of the highest paid people in the world? They make people laugh. You know why they're highest paid? People want to laugh. You know why they want to laugh? Because the world's a veil of tears. That's why you like comedians. The classic example is what they call Pagliacci. Laugh, clown, laugh. That's an opera. And Leoncavallo and Mosconi, I never forget which. They play it with another one called Cavaliere Rusticana. But that opera by Pagliacci is a clown getting out and having to make people laugh. And he gets out to make them laugh, and while he's laughing, his heart is breaking because his wife stepped out on him. And at the end of that opera, he kills the guy and messes around with his wife, and then has to come out again and make him laugh out on the stage. It's a tragedian, the tragic clown, see. Red Skelton had to go on the air and make him laugh when he was about 2 days from a heart attack, almost killed him. And Abbott and Costello, one of those, I forget which one of them, had to go on there after one of their relatives just died. They just buried him. You come on and make folks laugh. The high paid. You say, why it is? It's because it's a veil of tears. Now I'm going to talk about these tears a while. And first I want to say this, you have this. You have the tears of poverty. The tears of poverty. I mean, some folks just don't have anything. Yeah, I don't know how many men have committed suicide because they couldn't take care of their families. Probably a lot of white Europeans. You don't read about many black folks committing suicide. When I say you don't read many, you don't read one in 50 years. But the Europeans, they got the record. The Norwegians and the Denmark, the Danes and the Austrians, they got the record. And there's many a man that thinks about suicide or commits suicide because he can't take care of his family. If a man's a real man, any kind of a man, ladies, he feels obligated to take care of his family. And some of you newly wedded couples starting out, there'll be something you girls may not understand about male human nature. And of course, some of you marry some foul balls, that's true. But you're all got about 1,000. Some of you are going to marry some ding-a-ling, you know, and you'll have to support him the rest of your life. But if a man's any kind of a man, he feels obligated. A man who's a male has a protective instinct about the female, you see. And that's something the last couple of generations know nothing about. You girl looking for a husband, you're going to have a time. You're going to have a time. You're going to have a rough time, man. I wouldn't want to be a girl again. Yeah. Well, you can't fix that up. Nothing you can do with that. That's over the hill. I meant to say I wouldn't want to be young again and be a girl. You know. And you two girls coming up, you're going to have to look around for a man to marry. Where are you going to find a man that loves children or wants to have children or wants to take care of them after you have them? That's your problem. You know, the trouble is, the bunch of males coming up, they're not real males. They're not like a male lion going to take care of the cub and the old lady. I don't know what they're like. Well, you have a male instinct about that, and if a man sees his wife all the time, doesn't have what she needs, and the children don't have what he needs, it gets him down. It bothers him. Makes him irritable. Start arguments in the family. Bust things up. Men are like that. They won't say anything about it. They won't tell you what the thing is, but eat on them like that. And you have the tears of poverty. Now, poverty, talking about poverty, there's a raging, gnawing poverty, and there's what America calls poverty is not really poverty. Most people over there in India and the Philippines and Africa, they think all Americans are millionaires. And they are compared with them over there. I mean, I've seen them. I've been in the streets of Bombay at night where there's no line down the middle and the traffic's going both ways with the cars that far apart. I've seen a fellow lift his hand to go with the car going under his arm crossing the street. No street lights. The little free-wheel thing, I guess they were about 8 horsepower, motors in them. Wheels about that big around. Look like you're riding a lawnmower. They go 40 and 45 miles an hour through there. And I've seen them come up the traffic with that dust so thick at night you can hardly see through anything there, and the lights of that city blazing away and all through that dust. And I've seen a head rise up the hood in front of your car, and it'll be some beggar that lying there beside the highway with the dust going over him, and when the car stopped there a few minutes at a jam, he'll crawl out in the traffic and crawl up in the car because he's got a broken back and one leg and try to get something to eat. It's poverty. Poverty. There's been many a tear shed by people like that. Many a tear. Poor. Just some don't have clothes, don't have food. Some don't have anything. lining up the children for school each morning. They will pray and sing songs and hymns before they start out on a 2-mile walk. That kid's just 6 years old, bare feet. 2 miles to school, 2 miles back from school. An actual platter of bugs the lepers will have for dinner on this day. These are not quite as good as ant eggs. Poverty. All they got is bugs and ant eggs to eat. Poor children brought to us in the mountains, but we could not accept them as we don't have enough room and food to feed them. That's Tillman's work. The lepers over there in Thailand. Now there are millions of people in the world like that. And there's some tears shed. I say this word is a veil of tears just because it hasn't hit America like it hit a lot of other countries. America's not the only country in the face of this globe. And God Almighty looks down and sees that stuff. There's many persons crying themselves asleep at night with their stomach growling. And they don't have anything. They asked Bud Robinson, he was a boy, was he poor? He said, well, if we poor, if we was the poor, if they would just ate one meal. They said, what'd you do for the other 2? He said, well, for breakfast, he said, we ate prunes, and for dinner, we drank water, and for supper, we let them swell. That's all he said he had to eat. One fellow said, our land was so poor, it couldn't even raise a fuss. One fellow said, our land was so poor, Pa would eat an acre of corn in one sitting. That's exaggerating things, you know. But there have been poor people in America like that, way down, sharecroppers, and poor folks back in the back end of nowhere. And some of these large cities, the poor, just dirt poor. One of the best analysis I ever read of the race situation and all the stuff, the integration and segregation thing was in the New Yorker back when it used to be somewhat a clean magazine. And that magazine, the fellow spent, he wrote 4 or 5 articles there through a period of 4 or 5 months. And that thing, he said that after investigating everything thoroughly, he said he figured, and of course I don't figure this, but he figured it, he figured that any race has as much potential to learn as another race, but he said the situation with the black people is mainly due to the fact they have a matriarchal society, by which he meant that they're not raised by daddies, they're raised by mamas. And he wanted to know why these ladies wanted to get their illegitimate children welfare, and it wasn't just because they were poor, just because they were lazy, it's because they wanted something they could call their own. They didn't care how they got the child. When they got the child, this is my baby. Because that's all they had. They didn't have a car. They didn't have a job. They didn't have a house. They didn't have a yard. They just wanted something they could call their own. Poor folks. Po folks. Over in Mississippi they say per folks. Up in Georgia they say po folks. And a lot of them. A lot of them. One time up there in the mountains of North Carolina, a woman was putting her children to sleep in bed at night, trying to take care of them, and a blizzard coming down, the snow all over the place, and there were cracks in the cabin, and holes in the walls and things, and snow blowing through the cracks. And she put the kids down there, and by the time we got the little one covered up, the boy there about 14 or 15 years old, didn't have anything left to cover him with. The blankets were gone. And she put some coats and things over him, and the snow was coming on him, and she got her a board, a piece of plywood about that long, laid it across him so the snow wouldn't land on him and melt. And when she put that board across him, when the little boy said, he said, Mama, he said, what do the poor little boys and girls do that don't have any boards to cover up and to keep the snow off them? I'll tell you what they do, they freeze. That's what they do, they freeze. Warsaw in World War II, in that Warsaw ghetto, 500 of them. Just out there freezing at night. No home, no blankets, no nothing. They freeze. That's what they do. I've been to Tokyo after World War II, and I've seen them get out on the trestle in the morning out there, overpass where the electric train goes over, or that diesel, whatever that system they got over there. I've seen kind of those trestles in the morning shake the snow off them. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, no mama, no daddy, no aunt, no uncle. They sleep in piles under there. A bunch of them like this. That's back around 1946 and 47. They come out and they lie down and the snow would cover them up. They didn't have any boards to keep the snow off them. Just all got in a glob there, 30 or 40 of them slept holding on to each other all night long, get up in the morning. You say, what do they do for food? Some of them hunt flies. I've got a good friend over here who adopted a couple of Korean kids after that mess in Korea, and he had to break them the habit of catching flies. Because every time they get hungry, they go around the house, catch a fly and eat it. Most of you don't know anything about that kind of poverty. I don't. I've lived for $30 a week. I've had to stuff blankets in the window to keep the snow from coming in, but I had the blankets. And we didn't have any refrigerator. We had an ice box and hauled the ice, 25-pound blocks, that kind of thing. I mean, after I was grown with a college education, man, I've been along that thing a little bit, but not a lot, not like that. I've had to beg for money sometimes, and I remember a couple of times I really got burdened about it. I had to get and got crying about it because my kids were in rough shape. But that was just once or twice. I didn't have to live that way for 40 years, 50 years. And this world is a veil of tears. That's what it is. I got a picture at home, and I don't know where it is. Of course, it's been years and years since I've seen it. I probably could never find it again. But it's a picture painted back around 1890 by a very talented artist that really puts the thing across right. And he has a picture of two little boys waking up on a snowy morning. You can tell it's somewhere in January or somewhere around December. And they're waking up, and there's a big snowfall coming outside. You see the wind whipping around, and one boy's in a rich home. You're looking out the window, and you see his snowshoes over there in the corner, and his sled over there. He's just waiting to get in the snow. And he looks out that window, and he's jumping up and down for joy and say, "Oh, look, it's snowing outside." The other picture shows a mountain cabin way back here in the mountains someplace with the same thing going on. The snow coming down, pouring down, and in a kind of a blizzard. And that thing, there's a little boy up there looking out through the window, and there's a broken place in the window. He's looking out, and the snow is just pouring down. You can tell the temperature's way down. Ice goes hanging down here and there. And he said, "Oh, it's snowing outside." Two ways looking at it. If you're poor and flat broke, it's snowing again. And if you're a rich kid and, got earmuffs and gloves, it's snowing again. This is the tears of poverty. You have the tears of poverty. You have the tears of poverty, and some people are just so poor they have nothing. I'll be one of the worst cases I ever dealt with was a woman and her daughter in Baltimore. It was Bertha and Martha Siegel. And I forget which one was the mom and which one was the daughter, but the daughter had been an invalid for years, bad invalid, rheumatoid arthritis, then kidney trouble, then gallbladder trouble, and God knows what, all kinds of trouble. And the mother waited on her day and night, and been waiting on her day and night. The mother had fallen down the cellar stairs and broken her leg, and had to wait on her daughter on crutches for about 6 or 7 months. And I went by, and that place they lived in didn't have any south exposure to it. The windows the north side of the house, and they were an apartment house, tenement, so they didn't get any sunshine. The sun never shone in that window from 6 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night. Never shone in there. The house faced off north. Other apartment behind it on the back. And you take those kind of things, those folks just lived there. She didn't have any income. Was just dependent upon handouts to get by. Didn't have any regular job. The woman I saw, she was in her 50s, and the daughter was in her late 30s, bedridden. And the mother hobbling up and down the cellar stairs and that crutches, trying to take care of her. Poor folks. You know what the mother said to me? She said, "Brother Ruckman," she said, "the people who've given us the most trouble since my daughter's been like this." I said, "Sure, the Christians." And she said, "Yeah, the Christians." You say, they come there and anoint with oil, and then say you don't have enough faith to get healed. And come there and said, if you'd been living right, you wouldn't be like this. And healing, they told me, with the stripes you're healed. God wants you to be healthy, and I wish above all things that your soul prosper, you be in good health. Bunch of charismatics. They gave more trouble than unsaved people gave. Devilish stuff. Now listen, don't you know many a tear was shed in that little place, that little apartment? That was in South Baltimore. I don't know how many tears were shed in that place. I don't know, but I bet you there was a mess of them. Those are the tears of poverty. Then that is no. We have some more kind of tears. We have the tears of pain. Like a fellow doctor told me one thing. He said a man can stand almost anything better than he can stand pain. And there are people who cried and cried and cried. There are people who have never had a breath without pain in their body for sometimes years at a time. And it's like I say, I'm not a pessimist. But when you get in the ministry, and some of you fellows get in the ministry, and you get around, dealing with people, you run into all kinds of things. And when you get into things, you begin to see how the world really is, and it's a shock. I'll be the biggest shock I ever got in my life was just becoming a pastor. I mean, when I came out of a military atmosphere where it was all military and there wasn't any humanism there, we were conditioned, we were dehumanized, and you had to be to really, get out and kill, be a professional. And we were raised in those kind of families. And to me, people were targets. They weren't human beings. They were targets. You aimed at them. And after I got saved, for years and years after I was saved, it took me years and years to get through that dehumanizing process and become a human being again. And some things I went through, God put me through to make me more like a human being. I wasn't enough like a human being. But He can put you through stuff that'll, after a while, it'll make you fallible and weak like human people are. And that's put you through that. But when I first got saved, I wanted to be an evangelist. Now I went and I did evangelistic work for years. And I had good success. I won souls to Christ. But God didn't want me to be an evangelist. And during that time, there's something about being an evangelist where you get the full import of Christianity as an evangelist. Because you just come and go. You don't really get in with the people. You're kind of a visitor that comes in, And then you come and you go. But the pastor, you got to be right there with them all the time. Get, as they say, involved with them. And you guys that are saved and called to preach, that's what's going to happen to you. And if you don't have any heart for human beings, after a while you're going to get it. Because you're going to get pitched in with them. Well, the greatest experience of my life was just coming to Brent and having supplying a pulpit there for about a year and a half. And I'd go to the hospital, and here'd be a little 12-year-old girl in the hospital dying of cancer. Mama's a Christian, Daddy's a Christian. She's lying there, and she's in an oxygen tent. And she'd be pulling the oxygen tent and saying, Mama, take this away, Mama. Mama, what's this here for? Mama, take this away, I had to watch that stuff. I just ate my guts out. I sat through combat films where they're going up in flames and wrapping them in barbed wire and throwing gas in them, setting fire to them, and headless here, and an arm lay here, and a leg here, and the guy come out of the tank, burning, not Hollywood. The guy coming out burning, boy, and burn right in front of you. Never bothered me particularly. But I watched that little old girl, 12 years old, and a little old boy, 6 years old. Stop it hurting, Mama. Mama, it hurts. I'm in the children's hospital. Mama, it hurts. Mama, can't you please stop the hurting, Mama? Mama, it hurts. Mama, please stop the hurting. Whew. Eat your lunch, boy. Eat your lunch. Ate mine. Ate mine. Fix me. And those are tears shed. You're going to run into that. Tears, tears, tears. Old Tommy said to one of his friends, a man named Dr. Chelsea, he said, you're always so cheerful all the time. He said, you must have a marvelous life. God must have been awful good to you. He said, to be as cheerful and carefree as you are. And that old man smiled at him and kind of wrinkled his eyes and said, yes, God's been good to me, Brother Talmadge, but he said, I'm sick right now. As a matter of fact, I don't hardly make a move without pain somewhere in my body. And he said, as you know, 2 of my boys died, and I only had 1 daughter, and she's in an insane asylum. Wham. See? Got these tears. The tears of pain. I used to preach a good bit down around Panama City, and I had a woman down there, her name was Margaret Holden. And Margaret Holden, I guess, had some kind of a thing like diabetes, where they had one amputation, and then another amputation, then another amputation, and I don't know how it finally came out. She died shortly after I talked with her. Shortly, I say about 2 years. When I talked to her, she'd been operated on twice, amputation, one leg off of the foot, and about the next one was going to come off. The next one come off of the knee, and she's waiting for the third one when I saw her, and that was going to be the other foot. And I don't know whatever happened. I know she was dead a few months later. And I went to see her and talked to her, and somebody said, well, Brother Ruckman, would you draw her a picture? She'd never seen you draw except on television. I said, okay, if you put me a piece of paper up in the back of her door of the bedroom in the hospital, I'll draw her a picture. So my biggest audience for Chalk Talk has been one person. I go to the hospital and draw for one person or 2 people there in the bed. And I drew for Margaret Holden, I drew a picture of the second coming of Christ and about the millennium. And I began to talk about the inheriting in the kingdom, and talked about when Christ came, how you get rewards and be rewarded for what you've done. And she sat there and just cried and cried and cried and cried. And I went ahead and finished, and I didn't mean to rub it in. And I said, I didn't mean to offend you, Miss Holden. I said, but I was just talking about the millennium and how it'd be like, and I thought you'd get a blessing out of that. She said, I would, Brother Ruckman. She said, you said when in your sermon, you said, if we suffer with him, we shall reign with him. I said, that's right. And she said, well, I never have suffered for Christ. And I said, how long have you been saved? She said, I've been saved about 20 years, but I've never suffered for Jesus Christ. And I said, well, you can suffer now, can't you? And then she began to smile, and she said, oh, yes, I can suffer now. I can suffer now. Tears. Got the tears of pain. I don't know how many of those tears have been shed. I'd hate to guess. But in the concentration camps, those Jews by the million, literally by the million, talk about shedding tears. Every night there in the barracks, one or two of those Jews would stand up and say, now, he said, I'm going to put this belt around my neck and kick the box out from under me, and I'll see you in the land of Israel. The fathers hanging their own son, and the sons hanging their own fathers, and people committing suicide in those concentration camps because they just couldn't take the pain, and couldn't take the bereavement, couldn't take the horror, and couldn't take the torture of those places. And after the Germans, for a while, they got sick and tired of coming there in the morning and seeing bodies hanging around they couldn't identify, and they'd say, would you please leave a label or note on the body telling us who it is? That's how much they thought of it. In those places like that, they'd take fellows and whip them to death, whip them till the skin came off them, flay them just like a deer. Don't you know there's some tears shed in those places? Tears. I mean, I'm glad I'm saved, and I know I'm saved and all that kind of thing, but I don't have any illusions about this world. They took a Jew up there and hung him up by his feet for stealing a potato or something like that, and all day long the fellow whipped him, hanging upside down naked. An SS man just stood there with a whip and just rocked him back and forth, whipping him. And that fellow began to scream. You hear him all over the roll call area. The fellows out there working could hear him on the job. The whole place got so tight and quiet, you hear him screaming for half a mile away. And he screamed and screamed and screamed and screamed. Call for his mother, call for his father, call on God, nothing happened. And the commandant, Franz Stanger, will go by and say, well, at last our Jewish friend has found wisdom. At last he desires to die. He should never fear death in the start place, in the first place, because many times death is preferable to living. Said our Jew has now found this out, you know. And long about sundown, when they were back there for the last roll call, that Jew suddenly began to scream in Yiddish and Hebrew. Well, a lot of Germans couldn't understand him. A word to the effect of, men of Israel, don't let them get away with this. The world will never forgive them they find about this. Arise, fight, fight. Don't let them take you like pigs to the slaughter. Fight. And about the time a bunch of Germans who knew Hebrew heard that fellow doing that, they rushed up and put an end to his life with a pistol. But don't you know he shed some tears before he went out? They take those prisoners, the fellow tried to escape, they put him in a dog cage. The dog cage would be about 6 feet long and about 3 feet wide, about 3 feet high, and have a mesh, chicken wire with the front of it. And then inside that box, the box side would be 10 penny nails sticking through there. Maybe about 30 of them. Put the guy in there and leave him there till he finally kicked the bucket. No water, no food, stuck on the nails, couldn't stand up, couldn't sit down, couldn't lay down. Don't you know there's some screaming in there, there's some crying in there? And listen, beloved of God, listen, 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 listen. If that Bible is right, God saw every bit of that. And let that thing go. Life's a vale of tears. God sent one man into this world without sin, and the Bible said about him, he was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Acquainted with grief. I know what this fellow is crying about. Maybe it could be pain. Maybe it could be poverty. Maybe it could be some other thing you want to talk about. But it is a vale of tears. Those of us who've been together here for years and years now, we remember Ida Bell Salter, who used to hang her out of the county rest home there, the place, whatever you call it out there, and she was out there for something like 32 or 34 years. She was out there 32 and 34 years, just wasting away and Christian. And we never had a guy ever go visit her that didn't get revived when he went in there. You go to cheer her up, she'd cheer you up. I used to come in there and I'd say, let me hear you say, praise the Lord, Miss Salter. She'd say, praise the Lord. I think, man, oh man. I got some folks in my church can't say it that loud. And they got all the arms and all the legs and out there fishing, hunting, dating, and playing ball. Strange world, isn't it? Strange world. What is that? And that's a veil of tears. Those are tears of pain. Then that isn't all. We have another kind of tears. We have the tears of bereavement. By bereavement, we mean you lose somebody. To bereave somebody is to take something away from them. You have to bury your mother. You have to bury your wife. You have to bury your husband. You have to bury one of your children. You cry. You can't help it. Paul says you're to weep. You're not to weep as others weep who have no hope. I'm a Christian, but you can't help weeping. You can't help being sorrowful. And you have the tears of pain, the tears of bereavement. Christ felt it. They said Lazarus is dead, and when he got the tomb, the Bible said Jesus wept. You say, why? He was one of Lazarus' friends. He wept over Lazarus. Jesus wept 3 times. He wept over Lazarus, he wept over Jerusalem, and he wept in Gethsemane. Those are 3 times he wept. And that weeping there is, in this case here, is over bereavement, losing somebody. Madame Curie, the famous lady who invented radium or whatever, was an experimenter with this and that and other thing, and quite a famous woman. She had a fine husband she loved who was a nobody, but he took care of her and she loved him very much. And when he died, she went out to the graveyard, and when she came back from the graveyard, she opened her diary and began to write and wrote down, I saw you today and saw you for the last time, and you went down the deep, deep hole, and they covered you up where I couldn't see you anymore. The end has come. The end has come. Everything is gone. Well, not really. Not if you're saved. You're not the sorrows. Other sorrow have no hope. For we believe Jesus died and rose from the dead. Even so, them that sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. But you still couldn't help the crying. John Carlyle, a famous English writer, had a wife who died slowly of cancer through a period of about 2 years. And she was bedridden most of that time. And he was a very busy man, had a lot of writing to do, and didn't come up, see her very often. Sometime he'd come up, and a long stay would be about an hour. Then he'd get back onto his work, which he felt like he had to do. And after about 2 years she died, and it was a miserable, cold, wet day, and he went back home after that funeral and got messing around among some of her papers and stuff there, and her belongings, and he found a diary there with some of her entries in it. And he saw different entries say, he came in today, it was so wonderful just to see him for a while. And then she would say, I wish he'd stay longer. If he knew how much it meant, I'm sure he would stay longer. Another one would say, he didn't come in today. I wish he'd come more often than he does. And he got reading that thing, got all tore up, and they found that fellow out there in that muddy rain by that grave about an hour later, just sitting there in the mud, just crying like a baby. And said, if I'd only known, if I'd just known how much it meant to her, I would have done it different. If I'd just done tears, boy, tears. This world is filled with it, filled with it. I've heard guys say, and I know the fellows that said it told the truth, but some of these real hard characters, like old George Myers, who was chauffeur for Al Capone, the last time he cried was 15 years old. He didn't cry again until he was 72. He never shed a tear for over 50 years. Some of them are like that. That has been my experience. My experience has been, I've had a couple of Gethsemanes along in there. I don't say much about it, and I'm not going to say much about it. But when Jack Hyles got in trouble, I wrote him a letter. You know, they were crucifying him and calling him everything but white. And I wrote him a letter, and I said, I don't know whether you have been through what you're going through right now, but since you've taken the stand with the King James Bible, I'm for you. And I said, I've been through a couple of dark places in my life, and I said, I'm sending you what was a blessing to me. It may not be a blessing to you, but I'm just going to tell you what was a blessing to me. And if you're going through some Gethsemane, this might be a help to you. And I sent him about 20 verses. I never heard from him, never wrote back. But I hope he got it. I hope he got it. It's a veil of tears. You have here the tears of bereavement. You take when JFK and Martin Luther King Jr. died, they talked about the whole nation being in mourning and everybody was crying, upset about it. Oh no, they weren't crying about him for his loss. They were crying about the loss of position and image and influence. They didn't talking about the man. Where'd you read about anybody crying for Martin Luther King Jr. or JFK that was crying because they loved him as a man or a person and missed him as a person? You never read it. You read the journalists miss him, he make good news. The one world was a miss him, he was guilty of treason. I guess a couple of women he shacked up would miss with him. He was a good publicity for them and a good income. But just as far as loving and missing the man, nobody missed him. They're going to miss you when you die. Talk about the whole nation in mourning. Every time one of these jerks gets shot, I guarantee you I wasn't in mourning. When JFK got shot, it said, we are all guilty of his death. I never heard such slander in all my life. But I never even read anywhere where Jackie said, I'm going to miss him so much, he was such a good husband. His own wife didn't miss him. She got there as quick as she could get out, man. Isn't that something? Ain't that strange? Bereavement. When you lose somebody you love, you're going to miss them. And they're going to be tears, they're going to be crying. I've had, I was going to say many a funeral. It hasn't been very many, thank God. Only about 5 funerals. But I hate to have these funerals where the casket's about that long, you know. And to get those things like that and get up there, and then the mom and daddy sitting down there in the front row, and they just cry all the way through it. Just all the way through it. They start crying at the beginning, they're still crying when it's over. Those are bad scenes. Those aren't 50 tears a year. Those are 50 a day. It's a veil of tears, like I said. And these are the tears of the Bible. You have the tears of bereavement. Then you have this. You have the tears of loneliness. Some people just don't have any friends. They're just all by themselves. Did you ever read what Jesus said? It said, when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, they all forsook him and fled. You say, how many of them? All of them. You know what Paul said before he died? At my first answer, no man stood with me. They all left him. You know what Jeremiah said? I sat alone because of the mockers. Nobody stood with him, all by themselves, like a leper outside the camp. Back then, the Old Testament man was a leper. He had to go outside the camp and cover his lip and say unclean and unclean. Couldn't talk with anybody, couldn't deal with anybody, couldn't eat with anybody, couldn't have fellowship with anybody, just by himself. The Bible let us go to him without the camp, bearing his reproach, talking about Christ. Loneliness. Back in the old days, many times they put a fellow in prison, they put him in one cell and leave him there till he died. And he had no communication with anybody. That story about the Count of Monte Cristo is about that kind of an incarceration. They take the boy out there in the rock and put him on the rock and put him in a cell with nobody to talk to and just leave him there. And the jailer comes by, gives him his food 2 times a day, and the rest of the time, that's it. And he can't plead his case, he can't contact for help, he can't get out, he can't talk to anybody about his case, he can't get a hold of a lawyer, he can't get a reprieve, he can't get a friend, he can't get a relative in. He's just there by himself 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and he dies. It's alone. One of my favorite characters, a character up in Maryland that Cargill called Beaver. And that's not the Beaver up in North Carolina, that's another Beaver that Buddy Cargill had up there. And that fellow's about my age. You were such a character all your life. He came up and married an Indian woman. This fellow's about 5 feet 8, he married an Indian woman 6 feet 3. And he got messed around, then got into prostitution, and got kicked out of that. And he got in the army, got over there in World War II and got captured by the Germans and put in a concentration camp. Got back out, came back to the States, went out in the woods and took all his clothes off and lived in a cave for 2 years. Till the sheriffs came out and picked him up and put him in a prison for the criminally insane. You haven't met such a fella. And he got out of that after 12 years, the criminally insane. He got out and got saved. And I've seen that guy do push-ups on his fingers in a church floor when he was 75 years old. Because in solitary, that's all he had. He was just by himself. In 12 years in that criminally insane place, he was in solitary 3 years, off and on, 3 years, total time 3 years in solitary. And he just exercised, did push-ups. All by himself. All by himself. The tears of loneliness. One of those lady they found after she died, one of those old folks home, she had a diary and it would say, nobody came today, nobody came today, nobody came today, nobody came today, nobody came today. Some folks don't have any friends. You got some friends. If you don't have some, make some as soon as you can. Alone. Over the county rest home over here, I keep calling them county rest home. That's probably the exact name of them. But right around the corner here, as you go out, take that. Oh, you know, you go out here and go down here and go around behind the cemetery and come out behind the hospital there. And then as you head out there toward Davis, there's a rest home up there on your right. I forget the name of it. I guess you all go to that one, don't you? All right, well, that's the place. And I was up there 2 years ago dealing with a German who died. He was up in his late 70s somewhere. I remember talking to him about his soul, and he was just hard as a rock. He's a deist. He said, I'm not a fundamentalist. I said, how long are you in the United States? You've been over here about 30 years. We had no use for the Bible. He said, I'm not what you call a fundamentalist. I said, well, I came by to see you. He said, I don't appreciate it. And I said, well, I know you probably wouldn't, but I said, I've always admired the German people and loved the German country. I got German food all over my house and German music all over my house. Got to live in them for a while. Well, I couldn't win him to Christ, and I got through talking to him. I said, well, I'll be the same. Except that time when I left, I didn't say goodbye that way. They say, bis später, meaning bis später, until later. Auf Wiedersehen means actually until we see again, but Auf Wiedersehen is goodbye. And bis später is not goodbye, it's until later. That is, I'll see you again, but not right away. And when I left that fella, I said, I thanked him. I said, Danke schön. I said, bis später. And he lay on that bed, he said, Auf Wiedersehen. I'm saying, until we meet again, he's saying, goodbye. He never got out, he died. I don't know if he had a friend in this world, don't know if he had a family in this world, don't know if he's even married. But he's just lying there by himself, facing eternity, dying. No one came a day, no one came a day, no one came a day. I don't say much about it, you young people, about your work with the old folks home, but I appreciate it. And it's good for you. It's good for you to see how folks turn out, because if the Lord tarries, that's how you're going to turn out. And they appreciate you coming. They appreciate you coming even when they don't say so and can't say so. And some about half nuts anyway. When they get there, the mind is slipping on them, you see. But they appreciate it. I know they do. And I know God does something with it. Those folks, a lot of them don't have any relatives come to see them. And some of them relatives come to see them just once or twice a year. The rest of the time they're by themselves. Day and night, night and day, day and night, night and day. Tears. Tears. Tears of what? Well, here's another one. And this is the tears of repentance. Christ says, there's rejoicing among the presence of the angels of God over one sinner that repents, the 99 just persons which have no need of repentance. And the angels rejoice when a sinner gets right and trusts Christ. Repent, believe the gospel. You see what you're drawing there? I'm drawing a man who knew all about loneliness and poverty and pain and bereavement. He didn't have to repent of anything, but he knows the kind of stuff you're up against. And know the kind of stuff you're up against. He's come here with his bottle. This is his lacrimatory. And his lacrimatory here is for collecting tears. He's come to get him some tears. And the Bible says a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. They have a legend, and it's not true, it's just a story, you know, but it illustrates the point pretty good, about the angel Gabriel. And the legend goes this way. The legend says the angel Gabriel one time was called in by God, and the Lord told him, he said, now, I want to have you go down the earth there and tell you what I want to have you do. I want to have you look around. I want to have you find for me the most precious thing you can find. And I want to have you bring it back up here to heaven. We're going to keep it as a memento. Find the most precious thing you can on the earth. He said, there's so many bad things down there, so much sin and so much corruption. I'd like to find something that's pure and holy and good and lasting. And there must be some good things down there. So go down there, and if you would, find the most precious thing, valuable thing you can find down and bring it back up. So as the story goes, down came Gabriel, and the first thing he did naturally was go to Vienna. where he could find the finest artwork in the world. And he got some of those pictures and brought them back and said, how about that? And the Lord said, no, that won't do. Those were made by sinners, and they'll rust and decay, and the shellac already coming off them with the varnish, and those are perishable. That won't work. And set him back down. And the story goes, he went and found him a Stradivarius violin, a genuine Stradivarius, which is some article. And he said, what about this? Surely this is a precious thing. It cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the Lord said, no, it's just made out of wood, and as time passed, it'll perish too. Go down and try again. And he went around there and finally saw a little baby there, and the little baby was smiling. And he brought the baby's smile back to heaven and said, now what about this? This baby is pure here, and this baby is clean, this baby is innocent, and look at this smile this little baby has. Isn't that a beautiful thing? And the Lord said, yes, but he's born in sin, and what can be clean that's born of a woman? And who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? Not one. He may grow up to be a murderer. He may grow up to be an adulterer. He may grow up to be a child molester himself. You don't know what it might be, and that won't do. And he went around and looked and looked and looked. He about to give up looking. And he kept looking around and finally said, I think I found it. When all other loves fail, a mother's love is good. A mother's love will stand. A mother will love her boy when nobody will love her boy. So he got a mother's love, and he brought it back up to the Lord and said, there, now what about that? Won't that do? That's a mother's love. That's true blue. It'll never fail. It'll never fade out. When all other stars go out, a mother's love will shine on like one lone sentinel of the heaven, guarding the outposts of glory with a glistening bayonet. How about that? And the Lord said, can a woman forget her sucking child? Yea, they may forget, but I'll not forget thee. That won't do. So the story goes, he hung around there for a couple more months, about to give up. About the time he's ready to go back to heaven and confess that he couldn't find anything that could be what the Lord wanted, about that time he heard a noise behind a fence, a wall fence outside of a farm. And there was a field out there, and he heard this weeping behind the fence. And he poked his head up over the fence and looked over there, and was a farmer. Old man up in his 60s someplace, lying down, sweat running off him, flat in his face there on the ground. He was praying. And as he got close to that fellow, he could hear him praying. And that fellow lying down flat in the bushes, his overalls. Got his toes, toes dug down in the dirt. And he was praying. And he was saying, God, I'm a sinner. God, folks think I'm a good man, but I'm not a good man. I'm a bad man. God, I'm going to hell. I don't want to go to hell. I'm going to burn it all out of burn hell for the things I've done, and nobody knows it but me. God, be merciful me, a sinner. The old hot tears began to flow down that old sinner's face. And about that time, old Gabriel reached over there, and he got him that lacrimatory and picked up about 2 or 3 of those tears, put the plug in, went back to the Lord and said, how about that? The Lord said, that'll do. That's just what I'm looking for right there. That's what I'm looking for right there. Now there's such a thing as the tears of joy. You remember Joseph, when he saw his daddy, wept on him, wept on his shoulder. You remember when Joseph made himself known to his brethren, he cried. You remember when the prodigal came home, the old man fell on his neck and kissed him, both weeping, just crying, tears all over the place. They're tears of joy. But listen, if you're here tonight, you're unsaved, and you die without Christ and go to hell, you know what the Bible says about you? There shall be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. Weeping. What it said. Christ said weeping. You're not through with it here. My God, haven't you had enough while you're here? You want to bawl out there? He said weeping, wailing, gnashing of teeth. That's what he said. Now we saved people, you know what we got coming? He says, weeping, listen. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh when? Yeah. The Lord comes back, joy comes. No more crying. Revelation 22. No more pain, nor sorrow, nor crying, nor death. You're going to be through with it. Why don't you have done with it tonight? What's the matter with you anyway? You're going to bawl some more anyway. You want to do it forever? Ain't 40, 50, 60 years enough for you? Well, I used to live up in Bay Minette. One time a fellow bought me an old bum in there. Brought him into my living room one day. And he was a bum of the bums. And he brought him in there and he sat him down and he said, Brother Pete said, this is some kin of his. We've been praying for him for years. He just can't get off the bottle. I wonder if you'd talk to him. And I talked to him, tried to get him to receive the Lord. He wouldn't do it. But I got kind of put out with him after a while, and tried to get hard with him. I normally those fellows, I'm real gentle with them, but he just kept on saying, well, I'm not ready yet. Well, I'm not yet ready. Well, I'm not ready yet. Well, I'm not ready yet. Not ready yet. And finally, I just stopped there and looked at him and stared at him. And I said, would you tell me something? He said, what's that? I said, what makes you love the devil like you do? And he said, what do you mean? I said, what's he ever done for you? And he said, what do you mean? He said. I said, look at you. I said, where's your wife? He said, she's gone. I said, where are your children? He said, they're all gone. He began to cry. And I said, where's your job? He said, I hadn't got any. I said, where's your money? He said, I'm broke. I looked at that fellow, his old tennis shoes with the top out, you know, and those snaggly brown teeth and rotten gums. Need medical help, I guess. And looked at that poor fellow and I said, would you tell me something? I said, in the name of God, man, after the way the devil has treated you, what makes you hang on him like you do? And he began to cry like a baby and got on his knees by the sofa and trusted Christ. Well, thank God he did, but it's about time. And it's about time with some of you. That Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. If you're unsaved, he says about hell, there should be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. Now, I've drawn you the way out, and there's the way out right there. You can see it clear. That's the way out. The man of sorrows, acquainted, get that? Acquainted with grief, came down and suffered and bled and died for your sins, and he's interested in putting your sins in a bag, your transgression in a bag, and tying them up and throwing them behind his back. He's interested in taking all your wanderings and writing them down in a book, and he's interested in taking your tears, putting them in his bottle.